In this video, we're going to go over 10 abilities that you are using wrong and it's costing you games. And really, it could be the thing that is preventing you from ranking up. So I'm going to break it all down, but if you want private coaching and special guidance to help you improve, check out my Patreon. Links will be in the description down below, and let's get into it. Now, the first ability that we got to talk about is definitely on a Nade. Now, this is potentially one of the most powerful abilities in the game, but a lot of people are just using it flat out wrong. The first thing that you're doing is using it to self-heal. And I'm not saying that every situation is going to be bad to self-heal, but only when you absolutely have to. All you have to do is break line of sight from the enemy, and you will be healed very, very quickly. So consider walls and natural pieces of cover as a way to get to that healing, as opposed to using one of the best abilities in the game to make an aggressive play. Now, speaking of using Nade aggressively, on a Nade is fantastic. If you can hit multiple players with on a Nade when your team is applying pressure, it can be such a huge swing in tempo that just kills a whole bunch of people that otherwise wouldn't care at all. Now, you do have to make sure that you're being aware of Suzu, which is the one thing that can kind of deny your Nade the most often. And I do think that depending on the rank you're in, this is something that you're going to have to play around more and more. So the better and better the Kirkos you're up against, they're going to be a lot more disciplined with denying your big nades and being ready to deny your big nades. But most of the time, I see low-ranked players not use Nade enough when the enemy Kiriko is just not even really paying attention to you in any meaningful way. They're literally throwing their Suzu off cooldown while you're holding it, trying to find that perfect moment when you should put the burden of proof on the opponent that may or may not even use their abilities correctly. In fact, most of the time, they're not going to. But as you go up against better and better people, you need to be a little bit more disciplined with when or where you use it. Although, sometimes just baiting Suzu out with your Nade is good enough. If your team is going in aggressively, denying a Suzu, so then your teammate, your Tracer, your Genji, or whatever can go in and not have to play around Suzu, that could be a really big deal. Not to mention, oftentimes a 3-man Nade, for instance, a Suzu might not be able to cleanse all of them. It'll be able to cleanse like 2 people, not all 3. Now, I will say the last tip I'll give you for Honor Nade is about compositions. If you're playing in a poke comp where you're never really being threatened that much, it's okay to primarily use your Nade, even on cooldown, just throwing it really far, trying to get some offensive value that your teammates can make a play off of. It's okay to do that a lot more than if you're up against like a dive composition, Tracer, Winston's. You would really like to be able to use your Nade to help you duel these targets when they come onto you, to nade the Winston if he dives onto you. You want to be able to have these cooldowns. If you throw your Nade really aggressively before the enemy commit to you, then you don't have it for when they do. You could just die out of nowhere. So it's important to understand that depending on how you're being pressured can change how you use your abilities. And if you're playing in a poke comp where you're never being threatened and you're just holding Nade to be used defensively when you're never actually gonna be pressured until your front line is kind of whittled down, then you're really wasting your potential, especially your carry potential when ranked. Now, the next ability that we got to talk about is Defense Matrix, one of the most powerful abilities in the game, but there's a couple of things that most divas do wrong. And the first one is just DM chokes and only spam. While it can be decent to DM a certain amount of spam if you're transversing from one space to the next, right? Because if your team is going down lanes, you don't want your team to like randomly die to some spam of ability, a railgun, a nade, random Hanzo arrows. Like, you want to deny those things, but you need to make sure that you have your DM for the moments in which you're legitimately trying to deny something specific, or you're using it for yourself to try to make a proactive play. So as an example, if you just keep DMing all over the place and then an on nade flies through, as a diva, you can react to that. You could eat that nade, and exactly what we just talked about, where a nade can just roll your entire team, you can deny that. Or let's say out of nowhere, you notice that there's a Ashe on the high ground flank, or maybe a Cassidy or whatever. You can pivot to that person and still have enough DM to deny their damage in time for you to get close to them, to duel them. So it's a good idea to always keep a little reserve of DM. Actually, the more reserve that you can have, the better. Because in addition to that, let's say out of nowhere, you're trying to DM a choke, and then your Ana is about to get one-clipped behind you by a Tracer. It's really nice to be able to pivot and then quickly save your Ana. Even if you were already using your DM for something else, you still have a reserve, and it's a great idea to not force yourself. Don't put yourself into situations where you have to use all of your DM to stay alive, or all of your DM to get anywhere, because then you're already setting yourself up for failure. You're already playing in a way that's going to force you to use your ability in a way that you just don't really want to use it. Now, the next ability that we got to talk about is Ashe's Dynamite. And this one seems pretty simple, but you would be surprised how many Ashes just kind of throw this out without thinking about what it really does and what you can use it to accomplish. So Dynamite, one, you throw it in front of you. As long as your line of sight is straight, you're not moving across there, it will be like that perfect arc where you could do a close range dynamite. Pretty simple stuff. In addition to that, if you're getting dove, you can use your coach gun to light it as you're retreating so that you could light tracers and Winstons and stuff on fire. But that's not even what I'm going to specifically reference. The thing that is the most important on dynamite is actually who you're dynamiting. And the vast majority of the Ashes I have coached, I just see them dynamite tanks in the front line all the time because it's a little bit easier. But Ashe can take off angles and high ground, which is really what you should be trying to take anyways. And most of the time, you're not even really trying to focus the enemy tank. You're trying to focus the squishies, and your dynamite is no different. You really want to put that dynamite onto supports to prevent their auto heal, force them to use cooldowns, on DPS to deny them off angles, force them to retreat. The damage that you're doing with dynamite is so much more valuable on a squishy versus a tank that can more or less ignore it, get healed up almost instantly. So it's really, really important that you're trying to throw it deep into the enemy backline, trying to get as many people in it as possible that are squishy. And in addition to that, you're going to be able to get a lot more ult charge, because remember, when you hit tanks with damage and abilities, you're going to be generating 30% less ultimates. And with Bob being so damn powerful, let's not just waste that valuable resource, that valuable ultimate generation. So yeah, all in all, this is a really important tip for Ashe. Seems pretty simple, but it's something that a lot of people are doing wrong. Next up, we do got to talk about Resurrect Mercy Res. Now, this one, another one, seems kind of simple at first, but Mercies oftentimes mess up this ability for a couple of reasons. Number one, they res everything. This is like the first primary problem, where no matter what's happening, they will try to res that person. It doesn't even matter if it's 1 or 2v5, they will pop that res, and then both of y'all will get staggered and you'll give free ultimate to the enemy team. Now, there are situations where you should force a res even if it makes no sense to try. Like, you're most likely gonna die. If the opponents don't mess up, you're gonna die. Sometimes a fight is close enough to where if you manage to get the res off, it's actually winnable. So unlike the previous example, let's say it's a Mercy versus 3 people, but 2 of them are weak, and you're resing in front of them, you're resing your tank, and reasonably, you shouldn't be able to get it off, but if they do let you get it off, your tank could come through and kill everybody. So this is the low risk because you lost the fight anyways, but high reward reses that might be worth sticking. So it's not always correct to just res when you're guaranteed to live. Sometimes you have to take that chance. Sometimes you have to play the odds. But it is important to understand that this is fundamentally different than resing when even if you get the res off, there's 0 chance to win, because then you're just staggering your team for no reason. And this can be extra bad when you need your tank or whoever to come back alive, reset, because you really only have 1 more fight in the bank and you can barely get there with the time you have left. And I've seen way too many Mercies mess up that timing, just throwing a res out there when it just doesn't make any sense. And conversely, I see Mercies not go for a res when that's the only way to shift the tempo back. If you don't get a res off, there's like 0 chance you're going to win the fight. So that's another example, and it's still winnable if you get the res off. So these are the things that you got to learn how to do on Mercy, evaluate very quickly. Not easy, but it's important, and it separates the decent Mercies from the amazing ones. Next off, we do got to talk about Winston Bubble, another fairly straightforward ability. However, the biggest problem with Winstons is they use their bubble before they're ready to use it, right? You need to be routing around cover, not necessarily full peeking the enemy. Jiggle peek corners, find a route or a path that doesn't peek the enemy team until you're ready to fully peek them, because if you are forced to use your bubble prematurely, that's a waste of value, because typically this is how it's supposed to go on Winston. You're supposed to do a soft engage that you use a bubble for that baits out a lot of cooldowns. Sleep, Nade, Suzu maybe some other abilities. You commit slightly, you bubble, you stay alive, you back up, you go to your team, you get full healed, you give your supports ult charge, and then the next engage is a more aggressive one that you also use your bubble with that is a dive that doesn't have as much cooldowns to deny you, right? That is kind of what you're supposed to do on Winston. And if you ever waste a bubble, like if you ever don't do the first engage properly because you're routing on points of the map or through areas of the map that just make you take damage and make you use a bubble, then you're never going to be able to have good engages. And every time you're going to jump in, you're going to get hit by a ton of utility. And I see this way too often when I coach Winstons. They'll jump in, either they'll just jump in right off the bat, full jump in, bubble in, and then just die right away because they're hit by a ton of utility, or they're super patient and they wait and they wait and they wait and they never really have a great opportunity, and they never do the setup or initial dive to bait utility, and then they just swap off because they feel like they're getting countered when they're never really doing or using Winston's bubble to its strength. The thing that you got to understand is that Winston's bubble used properly is a ton of pressure that enables your team and forces cooldowns. And if you don't use it right every single time, then you're just not going to be able to make the character even function at a base level. So it's super important to get down. Next up, we do got to talk about Hanzo's Storm Arrow, and there's two big mistakes that people are making on this one. The first one is they panic use it, right? You whiff a headshot, and then you pop Storm Arrow. What is the point of doing that if you're not going to be able to follow up your damage at all? If they have no damage on them, it's far better to play for the headshot, especially if it's a character that you can headshot one shot, than popping it instant into a Storm Arrow. Doesn't really make any sense. Now, if you hit a body shot, it could make sense depending on the situation, but not if you just completely whiff on the character. And I find too often that Hanzos will get impatient. They're shooting from range, they're safe, they're in a good angle, they're applying pressure, and they just have to keep focusing on hitting their shots, but they miss one, they miss twice, they pop their Storm, and then when the enemies commit to them, they don't have their Storm as a way to do more burst damage in the moment. So it's a piece of cooldown that you just didn't need to use. And then the second tip I'd give you about Storm Arrow, or the mistake that people are making, is that if you just finished a duel with someone, it doesn't matter who it is, you shouldn't have Storm Arrow pre-applied. Like, let's say you killed someone, popped your Storm Arrow, used one Storm to kill them, and you have all these other Storm Arrows left. You should really cancel it. Just get rid of Storm Arrow, because it's far better that if you're starting a duel with pretty much any squishy besides the one that you can't one-shot, and even then I would say it's better to have that one-shot capability and not start the fight off with the Storm Arrow. You would much rather cancel Storm and then just be able to one-shot or have a chance of one-shotting the immediate next person that is coming to pursue you to trade out their teammate. Really important tip here. Next off, we do got to talk about Discord, and Discord Orb is one of the most powerful abilities in the game, and it's really important as Zenyatta to use it primarily to heavily pressure the tank, at least in ranked play. If you have the opportunity to, just keep it on the enemy tank, whether it's Ramatra, Zarya, Rhine, Junker Queen. Just having that on that tank is going to prevent them from doing so much that you can't even see. I mean, you've had the games where there's like a freaking Junker Queen just running through your team and just killing everybody. If she has a Discord on her, she can't get away with half that stuff, and that's really, really important. And a lot of times, especially the lower in rank you go, players aren't playing discipline enough around cover or around their cooldowns. Well, they'll just randomly die because they have a Discord on them and they're not playing properly around the Discord. Now, every time the person de-peaks and the Discord falls off and they re-peak, you put it back on them. You just literally make their life a living hell. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't use Discord on certain targets, but I want them to be meaningful ones. And what I mean by that is, if there's a DPS on a close off angle that's a threat, put a Discord on him so that he is no longer a threat. You don't want that person to be able to sit there and potentially kill someone on your team. The longer they get to sit there in that power angle, the more likely someone's going to die. Now, the second that person leaves, Discord goes back on the tank. Same thing if you're being dove. You put the Discord on them while they're attacking you or during their setup phases to attack you, like a Tracer. You see them creeping around on the flank. You're like, all right, I'm going to put the fear of God in this person, Discord them so that I apply more pressure to them. I make them waste more cooldowns. But the second that person's out of the picture, Discord back on the tank. This is a really strong rank strategy. I think that there are other strategies that you could incorporate on this character in a more coordinated setting, especially if you're playing with like dive or something like that. But realistically, for ranked, this is going to be the easiest way to get value and the easiest way to climb, in my personal opinion. Now, next up, we do got to talk about Zarya Bubble, and I think that the big thing that a lot of people are missing with this, they're not getting charged, they're not making plays with it, they're not reaching its full potential, and it's because they're using bubbles to just build charge. And I do understand that you want charge, everyone wants freaking charge, but the only way to actually build charge is to do something deliberately, like take space, apply pressure, deal damage, and in the act of you doing these things, that is when your bubble is is most likely to get charge. You're not doing these things to get charge, you're getting charge because you're doing these things. I know it's kind of a weird idea, but you're making the right play. You're creating that pressure and that space, and the response to that is they have to do damage to you. If they don't, you just get to exist. And if they never do any damage to you, you can really heavily abuse that too on Zarya by just being a constant threat, a constant damage source, a constant form of space creation. But most of the time, the immediate response to this pressure is going to be the damage that is going to enable you to get more charge, and then you're going to be even more lethal, and it's a cycle that kind of continues with Zarya. And it's important that you don't just dabble slightly into the fight hoping that the spam will get you the bubble. You need to be playing correctly with the correct amount of pressure first, and the bubble will get you the charge you need. Now, the second ability on this list, and I think this is a rather simple one, but a lot of people just fail to get the best value with it or the simplest value with it, and it's Ice Block. A lot of lower rank mays, metal rank mays, they'll use Ice Block for most of the healing or all of the healing. But there are two problems with that. Number one, people can just wait for you, and they want to wait for you. So they're going to wait for you to pop out of the ice block. They know you're vulnerable. They're going to try to kill you. And number two, and this one's a really important one, you're missing out on an opportunity to pivot to a more proactive play. So I want you to pop into an ice block, and then I want you to look around. And the second that people are not paying attention to where you are, sometimes it might even be instantly. Sometimes you didn't even really get that much heals from it, but healing isn't your only way to win fights. Damage is a way to win fights. Getting to your team is a way to win fights. Making a play is a way to win fights. So there's a lot of things that you can do, and the win condition isn't always heal up and give your team all the time they need to properly deal with you. Sometimes your play is to temporarily go into ice block. Maybe they think you're gonna stick it, and you pop out and freeze them, pop out and icicle them, pop out and get out. These are the things that you could do on this character that is incredibly powerful. And if you're just using this as like an invulnerability and a heal, that's denying the fact that you can cancel this anytime you want. And there's a lot of other ways to win a fight rather than just sticking in it. And most importantly, you're giving up pressure, which is oftentimes worth far more than the health you're getting back, that pressure. Now, the last ability that I want to talk about in this video is actually Genji's Deflect. This is a really powerful ability. Of course, it enables his kit, but there are two large mistakes I see with Deflect. Number one is Genjis are using Deflect, imagining the best case scenario. And we've all been there. Deflecting grabs and deflecting Hanzo ults and nades and all that beautiful stuff, right? But you got to understand that those are maybe 1 in 100 deflects, maybe even less than that. Very unlikely, and playing for that consistently is not really the easiest route to value. Really, Deflect is best used in the most consistent manner possible, which is as a protection tool for you. Because if you're alive as Genji, you live to fight another day, you can go back in. You have low deaths, you're hard carrying. So Deflect is better suited as a tool to keep you alive and enable your aggressive plays than as a tool that is a gamble as to whether or not your opponents are gonna misplay into you. And I would say there are times when Deflect can be really, really good to potentially make a play against the opponents. Like you're dashing at an Ana, you're all up in her face, you deflect for her nade. But the idea there is even if she doesn't mess up, right? You're still denying a potential sleep or a play at the same time while applying a ton of pressure. And you're still looking to follow that up with a, right click or an alternate fire into a melee to try to potentially kill that person and get out. So regardless of whether or not that person shoots to the deflect, you're still going to get value. And that's the biggest thing, is you can't be making these plays that need your opponents to shoot your deflect. And that's what a lot of Genjis will do, where they're way out in the open, they do some crazy stuff, and they need their opponents to shoot that deflect to kill their own teammate or kill themselves in order for you to do anything at all, or else you're stuck in the middle of nowhere with no deflect. And this is a problem that I see a lot, where Genjis will sometimes just keep running up to people, deflecting, and then dashing back, running up to people and deflecting and dashing back, when there's just so much missed opportunity. Instead, why not you poke, see an opportunity, dash into that person, try to kill them, and then deflect to retreat. This is going to get you way more value on average, and I would highly recommend you do this playstyle as opposed to the super high gamble playstyle that against disciplined opponents just will never ever work, or unaware opponents, because they don't even know what you're doing, so they're not going to shoot your deflect either. But anyways, definitely let me know down below which ability you think players use wrong the most, and smash that like, subscribe if you enjoy the content. Thanks so much for coming by, and I'll see you next time.